They don't teach you stillness in a boardroom. I know, because I've stood inside enough of them to feel what's missing. That particular hush, when every person in the room is waiting to be impressive, waiting to perform. I've watched it, and I've never been part of it. My stillness is a different kind. It comes from 22 years of standing in ridgegrass at 4 in the morning, with a receiver against my palm, and the volume turned all the way down, listening for a signal so faint that your own heartbeat is the interference. That is what I do. My name is Dale Cutter. I am a field wildlife technician. Contract work, mostly federal grants and nonprofit money, a little state funding when the budgets haven't been cut. I drive a 2009 pickup with a cracked dash and a magnetic antenna mount on the roof. My daughter Wren is 11. She has her mother's eyes, and my stubbornness, and a notebook she fills with every bird she can name. She named it herself, the notebook I mean, called it the Index. She's been keeping the Index since she was 6, and it is already more precise than most official records I've seen filed with the agency. I've been tracking the Harrington's condor since before Wren was born. There are 9 of them left in the wild. 9. There were 3 breeding pairs identified in the literature when I started. Now there is 1 confirmed pair, a male and female I've been following for 11 years, in the Caldera Ridge backcountry of the Southern Range. I know where they roost in January. I know the female's wing tag number, VX07, and I know she tilts left on a thermal because of an old healed fracture in her left coracoid. I know the nest, a rock shelf at 6,200 feet on the eastern face of Garner's Bluff, and I know that this spring, for the first time in 4 years, there is an egg. The agency doesn't know about the egg yet. I was going to file the documentation the morning after the hearing. That was before the hearing. The hearing was a public land use proceeding, 200 seats in a county conference center, folding tables at the front. The Carver-Hollins Development Group had applied for a commercial expansion permit, a resort complex and access road that would cut through 11 miles of the backcountry corridor the condors use. My field data was submitted as part of the environmental review. 22 years of coordinates, behavioral logs, nest records, range maps drawn by hand, and then digitized, every one of them cross-referenced and dated and signed. I sat in the 4th row. I wore the same thing I wear in the field, because I hadn't thought about it until I was already in the parking lot. The Carver-Hollins attorney stood up and took 4 minutes to explain to the panel that my data was, and I am quoting here, anecdotal field observation generated by a single, non-institutionally affiliated contractor, unverified by credentialed peer-reviewed experts, and therefore insufficient as a basis for regulatory action. He did not look at me when he said it. He didn't know what I looked like. He had a graphic on a slide deck that showed my survey area as a blank polygon on a map. No data points, no contour lines, just a gray shape labeled unverified zone. Then a woman stood up. She introduced herself as the company's CEO. Her name was Renata Hollis. She was polished in the way of someone who has spent years learning how to be polished, and she spoke to the panel with a calm certainty that I recognized from a different kind of expert, the kind that has never been wrong yet in the room that matters. She said the company had commissioned its own survey of the corridor. She said their aerial assessment had found no evidence of active breeding habitat in the proposed impact zone. She said she was confident the review would conclude that the permit did not conflict with any protected species recovery requirements, and that the community's economic interests were best served by moving forward. She sat down. The whole thing, from her standing up to sitting back down, took 40 seconds. I timed it, out of habit, field habit. You time everything. I did not speak at that hearing. I had already submitted my documentation. I was there to answer questions if the panel asked any. They did not ask. The panel chair thanked all parties and said a determination would be forthcoming. I drove home through the dark and ate a bowl of cereal at the kitchen table. Wren was asleep. I did not open the laptop. I went to bed. The federal injunction came 8 weeks later. A colleague at the regional agency office had independently confirmed the breeding pair using my coordinates. I had shared them informally, as I always do, because data that sits in one man's files doesn't protect anything. The injunction halted the permit process, pending a full biological assessment. Carver-Hollins had 30 days to produce an independent expert evaluation of the impact zone, or the permit application would be referred to the Federal Review Board with a denial recommendation. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning. I was resetting a trail camera on the south slope at the time, so I missed the call. The voicemail was from a man named Greg Foss, who said he was the Director of Environmental Compliance for Carver Holland's development, and that the company was seeking an independent field expert for a rapid biological assessment, and that my name had been provided by 3 separate agencies as the leading authority on Harrington's condor habitat in the region, and that he hoped I would be willing to discuss terms. I played the message twice, then I finished resetting the camera, because the light was right, and VX-07 had been active on the south slope that week, and you do not waste good light. I called him back from the truck. I agreed to 3 days in the field with a company representative present, as required for joint assessments. The fee was substantial. I negotiated it fairly, and did not discount it, because 22 years of expertise is not anecdotal. I asked who the representative would be. Greg Foss said it would be the CEO herself. Renata Hollis had decided to be present. I said that was fine. She arrived at the trailhead at 5:15 on a Wednesday morning, in gear that was clearly new, and clearly expensive, and clearly purchased 2 days ago. I did not comment on that. I handed her a copy of the day's route map and a list of what we would need to stay quiet about and when, and I told her that in the field, I would need her to do exactly what I said, exactly when I said it, and that this was not a matter of hierarchy, but of not disturbing a nesting site that had taken 11 years to find. She nodded. She looked at me for the first time, with something other than the 40-second certainty. I'm not sure what it was. I didn't study it. We walked. The first day she was cautious and watchful, and asked few questions. The ones she asked were precise. She was gathering information, not making conversation. I respected that. I answered everything she asked, without editorializing. By midday, she had stopped looking at her footing and started looking at the ridgeline, the way people do when they're starting to actually see the place they're in. On the second day, she found her pace. I showed her the receiver work, how you sweep a sector, how you isolate a signal from terrain bounce, how you read the pulse rate to determine if the bird is active or roosting. She tried it herself, and she was not good at it, and she said so plainly, without embarrassment, and then she tried again. We picked up VX-07's signal at 0840 from a position on the ridge, and I let Renata hold the receiver and track the bearing herself. Her hands were steady. The signal was moving north-northeast along the thermal corridor. She followed it with the antenna and did not look away. "She's been using this corridor for 11 years?" she said. "Longer," I said. "I have records going back to VX-07's first tag date. She was already established before I started tracking her." Renata was quiet for a moment. She lowered the receiver. "The aerial survey our team did," she said. "They didn't have any of this." "No," I said. "They wouldn't." I didn't say anything else. I did not need to. The third morning, we were at the base of Garner's Bluff by 4:45. The sky was not yet light. I told Renata to sit down on a flat rock below the tree line, to stay behind me, and to keep her breathing quiet. She sat. She didn't ask why. I turned on the receiver and set it to passive monitor. VX-07's signal was strong and stationary. She was on the nest. I sat down in the grass, receiver in my lap, and we waited. The light came up over the eastern ridge in stages, gray, then gold, and with it came the thermal. You can't see it, but you can feel it on the back of your neck, the air beginning to organize itself. And then, from the rock shelf at 6,200 feet, came a shape, the male. He dropped off the shelf on closed wings, fell 50 feet, opened, and the span of him against the early sky, 8.5 feet of black against gold, is something I do not have words for after 22 years. I still do not have words for it. Renata made a sound, not a word, a sound, involuntary, from somewhere behind the polished certainty. The male caught the thermal and banked north, gone in 40 seconds. She turned to look at me. She had tears on her face, which she did not seem aware of, and that is the only way I will mention it. "How close is the road to that shelf?" she asked. Access road centerline, as proposed, would pass 1,100 feet south of the base of the bluff, I said. Blasting and grading activity at that proximity during the nesting period would be, in my assessment, a likely cause of nest abandonment. She looked back at the shelf. VX-07's signal was unchanged. She was still on the egg. There's an egg, Renata said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. We were quiet for a while. I need to see your field notebooks, she said finally. I gave them to her that afternoon, back at the trailhead parking lot, all 22 years of them. In a waterproof case I'd loaded into the truck that morning. 31 notebooks, graph paper, pencil, and waterproof ink, every entry dated and coordinates logged in decimal degrees. She lifted the first one and opened it to a random page and read it for several minutes without saying anything. When she put it down, she looked at me with an expression I recognized. I had seen it before, in the faces of agency officials who finally read a full biological report after approving a project based on a summary. The expression of a person doing the math. At the hearing, she said, my attorney described your work as anecdotal. He did, I said. She looked at the notebooks. I should have read these before the hearing. Yes, I said. You should have. She nodded once. Not apologizing, acknowledging. There is a difference, and I respected the distinction. Her company withdrew the permit application 4 weeks later. Renata Hollis contacted the Harrington's Condor Restoration Trust and arranged a private conservation easement on 1,200 acres of the corridor adjoining the federal boundary. The trust's director told me the funding was substantial. He also told me Renata had asked that the easement deed reference the nest site at Garner's Bluff by its field designation, which is a notation I put in notebook number 7, 11 years ago, in pencil, GB-01, confirmed active pair. I don't know if she'll come back out to the ridge. I think she might. What I know is this. The egg hatched on a Thursday morning, in early May. I was at the base of the bluff at first light, receiver in my lap, Wren beside me in the grass. She had a long weekend, and I had told her it was time. We heard VX-07's signal shift, the pulse rate spiking the way it does when a nest becomes active, and then after a long while we heard, faint and very high, a sound that had not been made at Garner's Bluff in 4 years. Wren opened the index to a fresh page. She wrote the date at the top, the coordinates below it, and then the time, down to the second, the way I'd taught her. What do we call it, she said. That's the first confirmed Harrington's chick at this nest in 48 months, I said. We'll use the site designation and the hatch sequence. She wrote it down, careful and exact. Then she looked up at the bluff, where the male was circling, already circling, a wide, slow arc in the morning air, keeping watch the way he always does. Dad, she said. Yeah. They were always going to make it, weren't they? I thought about 48 months and 22 years, and the way that signal sounds at 4 in the morning, when the air is cold, and the ridge is dark, and there is only you and the receiver, and the faint proof that something rare is still out there, still holding on. They needed someone to know where to look, I said. She nodded. She wrote that down too.